When I first started my sales career 12 years ago, there were a lot of promises about how to make multi-six or even seven-figure earnings. But once I actually started, I found that that path wasn't as clear as it was made out to me. I worked hard, but I was stuck in that low six-figure mark and was really struggling to break into that multi-six or even really be able to consider seven figures. It was tough. I couldn't see a clear path, and so I had to take a step back and really figure out how could I go about making this happen. So let me first give you some background. Now, when I started out in sales, I was working for a company that was selling printers and photocopiers, so a pretty traditional start. And I was in a career path where when I looked around some of my peers and some of the people around me, everyone was pretty much capped out at around that 100K mark. I didn't see anyone, even people who had been there for decades, breaking past that six-figure mark. And so that was why in my first few years, I thought I definitely knew I wanted a sales career, but I had to figure out a way to get past that ceiling. And I knew being in this industry and in a traditional, pretty old school, outdated sector, that it just wasn't going to be possible to break through that ceiling. And part of the reason I realized that was the case is because when I looked around, I saw the market opportunity in a diminishing industry like the printers and copier space. It always has a cap. It's not infinite, it's not worth trillions, there's a cap. So I knew when I thought about it, I'm always going to be stuck as long as I stay in this space because there is a limit to the market industry's potential. So as I realized I needed to make a change, I started to look at my peer group, and through a friend of a friend, I ended up meeting someone who worked for a data analytics company. I found out that he had a Lamborghini and he'd just bought the house of his dreams, and I had to think to myself, what does he do? So I was fortunate enough to first of all learn from my friend more about what he did, and then I got some time with him myself. His name was Craig. And once I got to sit with him, I found out that he worked in software sales, otherwise known as SaaS sales. And so I asked him, what is this all about? What does it involve? What does it do? And he explained to me that in essence, he sold software to other companies, and this type of software that he sold made a big difference for those organizations. And in his case, it was the type of software that helped to give them analytics that would help those organizations make more impactful and meaningful decisions to help those companies make more money. So the more I got to speak to Craig, I found out that actually it wasn't quite as complicated as maybe I thought it would be. I thought I can actually understand what he's doing, and there was nothing about what I was doing in my previous more traditional sales roles that would mean that I couldn't make the transition and go and make this happen with Craig. And so I got mentorship from him, I got support from him, I started getting myself around others who were in the space, learning and understanding more about it. And the more I started to understand, I thought, actually, this is a segment that has no limit to its earning potential, to its learning potential, and also to the career growth, because I found out from Craig that he went from a similar start to me, but he was able to rise through the ranks because there was no limit on his companies. He didn't have managers that were stuck stagnant in their roles and didn't want to move on. The company was progressive overall. People wanted to move on in their roles. And so he was able to learn, earn, and grow more than he could have ever conceived being in a more traditional role before. This was the first time that I'd met someone who was earning over seven figures per year as a salesperson. And it just completely blew my mind. I didn't think that it was possible. It was like a paradigm shift in my mind where I'd now been exposed to something completely different. And it made me know that it is actually possible to earn multi-six or even seven figures if you're in the right industry, in the right segment, and around the right people with great coaching and support. But with all of that said, there was something about Craig's journey which he unveiled to me, which I wasn't aware of before, that was a big part of the blueprint that actually got him to his first seven-figure year. And that was the fact that he owned some stock in his company. He owned some equity, which in simple terms means that he actually owned a percentage, a very small percentage of the company that he worked for. So you might be wondering, well, how did that percentage of ownership in the company actually help him to become a millionaire within sales? Well, what had happened was, at the point that Craig joined his business, they were privately owned. So it's no different to me or you starting up a company. You have 100% ownership in that company because you started it. And as that company grew and built and scaled over time, Craig, when he negotiated to join the company, asked for a particular amount of shares in that business, and he was able to negotiate that. Then eventually that company did something that is commonly known as an IPO, an initial public offering. And that's in essence when a private company becomes publicly owned because they choose to list themselves on a stock exchange. You've got the London Stock Exchange, you've got the New York Stock Exchange, and it's in essence, as mentioned, when a company goes from private to being publicly owned. And when that happens, it's what we call a liquidity event. And that means that the shares that you own get offered to the public markets, and you're able to realize actual cash and money by selling those shares on the public market. And in some cases, you can make life-changing money. If you think about companies like Facebook, you could just run a Google search on this. There were people who owned some of the private shares, and then once Facebook went public, they became multi-millionaires overnight. And this is pretty much what happened to Craig. The stock that he owned in the business, once they went public, the shares that he owned, he was able to convert into realized money. And that helped to take him over the line into the 7-figure club as a software salesperson. Now, you might be wondering, well, how can I do this in my own role? You might be in a traditional sales company now or working for another firm. Now, it is possible in different verticals, but it is infinitely more accessible with much, much greater returns when you do this within a software business. Why? The main reasons are the fact that within software companies, they typically grow at lightning pace, and they have much better multiples on the public market. What I mean by that is their valuations are typically much higher on the open public markets. And the reason for that is because software companies are more elastic in essence, right? They can grow quicker, and software generates monthly recurring revenue. So to investors and venture capitalists, these companies are worth much, much more in their minds versus companies that sell hardware or cars or anything that's traditional, old school, service-based or product or hardware-based. They just don't get the same market valuations as software, because software can be sold one to many and it generates monthly or annual recurring revenue, which really helps those types of companies to gain much more market valuation. So when we break this down, there's really a system to becoming a millionaire as a software salesperson. The first step is to transition your career into software sales. You need to join a company that is innovating for the future and that is setting a standard for where the world is going to go, with a massive market opportunity. The second step is to negotiate some stock options for joining that company. You need to own some stock and some equity within that business. The third step is to stay with that company long enough until they list themselves on the public market or they get acquired, so that the stock that you own becomes worth actual cash and realized money that you can then recognize to earn multi-6 or even 7 figures. Now, the challenge here is the fact that your hard work in following that blueprint alone isn't enough. The challenge is it's understanding the right types of companies that you need to join, how to actually negotiate a meaningful stock package, and then some tips and insights as to how to actually stay and sustain with that business until they go through that exit event. And that's absolutely something that I'd be more than happy to help with if it's something you would like to get some support with. So if you check out the link in the description box below, there'll be a link where you can go through, watch a short video, and then schedule a meeting with myself and my team. We'll run you through the blueprint that it takes to go through these steps effectively to quickly transition your career to multi-6 or even 7 figures. We'll walk you through that blueprint and then handhold you all the way through that step so you can set yourself up to have tremendous success over time. I was able to benefit from a lot of this upside myself, so I know exactly what it takes. I know the things to avoid and how to make this as seamless a process as humanly possible. I hope that this video has been helpful for you. I'll have some other videos that you may find interesting pop up on screen right now. Check them out as well. And if you're on the fence about any of this, consume a bit more content, learn a bit more about what it takes to make the transition, book a call in with us, and then we'll walk you through exactly what it takes. I look forward to seeing you on the next video.